See if that works. There. And go. Okay, here we go. So there we go. Excellent. So today's topic is mixed media. And I want to talk about this because traditionally we often go to the same thing all the time when we're going to make a piece of art, especially in our art studio at school, where we are creating on maybe a flat surface like a canvas or a piece of paper in your sketchbook, or maybe watercolor paper, a board, or we're making, like I might have been asking you to play with, some textured assignments that are still sitting on a flat surface, or maybe into a sculpture, and that's pretty much it. But often it's, traditional materials, classic art supplies like charcoal, Conte, oil pastels, chalk pastels, graphite from your pencil, watercolor paint, acrylic paint. You're not allowed to use oil paint in school, but oil paint would be another option at home. So you think of those classic art supplies, fine art supplies, visual art supplies that you buy at an art supply store, maybe as what you have to choose from. So medium is the word that talks about one supply that's being used. And multimedia would mean that you're using several of those, or mixed media would be most especially the word that's being used to describe those pieces. If you were to put a piece of art in an art gallery or in an art show somewhere, like for example up in the hospital in Kentville, they have a whole hallway of artists from the valley who hang their artwork there, and it switches up every month. So if you were to hang a piece there, or in one of the cafes or bistros or wherever, usually there's a little information card that hangs on the wall beside the art. And it would start off with the title of your piece. And lots of people will title their piece in a meaningful way of what they, as the artist, was trying to represent in the picture. And they lead the audience, the viewer, into seeing what you saw and what your self-expression was all about. But there are many, many artists who will title their work with the word untitled, capital U, and it becomes the title. And the reason why so many artists do that is because they want to leave the art open-ended so that the viewers spin their own interpretation of the art without being more led by the original artist than by just looking at what they're viewing. So untitled is very common for the name of a work of art. Sometimes artists who are prolific and have made a lot of pieces just for their own filing system about their art, they might number their pieces, especially if they've been using the word untitled, so that they can keep track of all their different untitles. So when you make one of those cards, you would have the title of the piece of work, and then you would have the dimensions of it. So when you're measuring art, you do not include the frame. So if it's a piece that's hanging on the wall on a flat surface, then you would just measure the canvas length and width of the canvas, and that would get written on the card. Then you would name the media. That's more than one medium. So if you were using watercolor on watercolor paper, you would do that. Or if it was watercolor on mixed media paper, if it was acrylic on masonite board, acrylic on canvas, whatever it is you've made it out of and what surfaces it is on would be named in the description about the third line down of what these materials were that made up this piece of art. You would also give maybe a price if you were selling it, or if it wasn't for sale, you can put NSF. No, N, not for sale, NFS. And then we would have, what else? If somebody's already purchased it, let's say it's been hanging in a show and somebody bought it, it would stay up in the show. Let's say the show lasted for a month. And the people running the show would put a red sticker there on that card to show that it's sold. Anything else on that? Your name, the size, the price, what it's made out of. Yeah, that's basically what it's all about. So I want to show you today some pieces of art that have been made in mixed media so that I continue to help you expand your mind of what art can be made out of beyond those traditional materials that I just named off. So anything's game. You've heard me reference a few things around this house. Maybe things I don't even suggest that you do in the modern day, but I can remember having Thanksgiving dinner and the bones from the turkey were saved and dried on the window ledge, and the next thing you know, they were glued onto a surface on a piece of art and painted purple or something. And nowadays we know more about salmonella, and we might not explore that as a medium, but anything can happen when you are the originators of recycling and upcycling, which is what artists are, because most artists are not out spending a ton of money on traditional classic art supplies. They are being inventive about what's already at their fingertips. So here we go on tour with me disassembling the house today and walking the flights of stairs and carrying things from everywhere so that I can share with you some examples of these things to expand your mind and think outside the box about how you can make your art. All right, on with the show. So the first piece I want to show you, I mentioned to you a week or so ago, and that is the piece of art that my mother did that was stolen. And it was hanging in the Beaverbrook Art Gallery in Fredericton, New Brunswick. Someone stole it. There was an investigation launched, and in the end, the RCMP found it, and they found it damaged. And as I had mentioned to you a couple weeks ago, we left it damaged because it tells the story of the journey of the painting. So here's the piece. My mother ventured through all different kinds of genres, but her main forte and her preference was to do abstracts, but often her abstracts are meaningful. So this abstract is like this, and you might remember me saying, I'll step back so you can see the full size of it. And this is the side right here where my fingers are moving that the frame is missing. So I'll show you that rough edge where the board's been ripped off. So this piece is mixed media because, see if I can get it to sit without the chair wiggling. This piece is mixed media because it starts with using the rough side of masonite. So there's a smooth side and a rough side. Normally you would paint on the smooth side, but this is a textured surface right here that would absorb a lot of paint because the paint would sink into the wood, and it's not the typical side to paint on. So what she's done is she's painted in some places on the rough wood, but in other places she's smeared gesso and made elevations and textures that are real and not implied. And when I rub my fingers over it, which you normally don't do with a painting because the oils in the chemistry of your body come off and can be damaging. So she's made bumps into the surface, and if you could see it, I don't know if it'll pick up on camera, but a side view, not really. Anyway, there's bumps right here that go up and down to make real texture instead of implied texture. I'm often teaching you about implied texture in class, but by crisscrossing your mark making, etc. The other thing that's on this, besides the paint, is the heart, and that is what this painting is all about. So that little heart that I'm showing you up close, oh, now you can see the bumps of the gesso. That little heart is, that little heart happens to be representing the first heart transplant that ever took place. So all these zigzaggy, crazy lines, and this maybe, I could interpret this up the yin yang and say this is a doorway opening into the future of healthcare. Maybe this is the journey that we've been on. Those are my interpretations as a viewer, not something that she said to me. The name or title of this painting is Progress. And interestingly, I don't know if that's why it was stolen, because it was marking a pivotal point in the history of wellness and healthcare. Interestingly, she had already done a painting on the back side, on the smooth side that you would normally use, and she didn't like it, so she whited it out so that it became the back. and it was of figure skaters, and it too had gesso on it. And I kind of chuckle because it's not like she ever spent a lot of money on her supplies, and it's being hung by just like a one of those blue and white string cord things. It's not even got the proper strong sturdy wiring on it. I say that, but this painting is old and it's lasted all these years and it's just as strong as ever. So that is the first piece that I would call mixed media, acrylics, gesso, and corrugated cardboard on masonite is how you would describe it, along with the measurements and the title and the artist's name. So progress in our healthcare. So now I'm going to show you another one. This mixed media. This was done on my parents' trip on the oil tanker ship going from St. John, New Brunswick to Maracaibo, Venezuela. And they were out to sea for 3 weeks, and they docked in port down there to pick up crude oil to then transport back to North America, back to New Brunswick to be refined in the Irving oil refineries. And there were 2 couples invited to be guests of Casey Irving, the original owner and creator of the Irving oil service stations, etc. So it was a working ship. It wasn't like a touristy ship. And every day my mother's entertainment was to watch the crew members, and they'd be doing their tasks around the ship, and they would become her subject matter. Their tasks that they were performing that then would become her paintings. And because she was more into abstracts and enjoyed them more than realism, then she'd be like I am. She'd be like a little scavenger going around finding neat things to adhere to her paintings. So this was her watching them paint for a fresh coat of paint on the side of the ship. So if I bring this up close, you're starting to see the sheen on it as the light reflects into it. But it has got those great big chips of paint that were being scraped off the side of the boat, which is why it needed to be painted. And you know, that green look that you see ships be with the rusty going on. Same up here, over here. And those are glued onto her painting. And then the white would be the scum at the top of the oil paint bucket that forms on a can of oil paint. We don't use oil paint a lot anymore because of the toxins in it. But she just scraped the scum off of the paint can, top of the paint, and glued it onto her painting, or probably just glued itself onto the painting. And then what does she do? She picks up the rags from cleaning, there, and down in that corner. And those are 3D. Those are very much 3D pieces that are stuck onto this painting that are the rags from cleaning from the painters doing their work on the ship. And I am suspecting that this white, because it's so glossy, it's an oil, and it's probably straight out of the paint bucket that was being used to paint the ship. The navy is likely her paint from a tube of regular artist oil, and then, you know, blurred that on top of this, kind of representative of being out to sea. So that painting is titled Representation, and it is mixed media because of all the different things that are used to create it. All right. Now, also on that trip, it inspired her. Whoops, that's life in the disassembled house. On that ship, she was very inspired by the architecture. So in South America, moving into the warmer climate of the southern hemisphere, the homes are made like cubes. They have flat roofs. They don't need the pointed roofs that we need for the snow to roll off. And they are assembled, clustered and snug and stacking almost up the side of a mountain. And when she would go into port, they went into 2 ports down there. She was just so taken aback because I don't think she'd traveled off of North America before that. And she just couldn't believe the extreme change in the architecture from here to there. And these buildings were all colorless. They're just white on white on white. And they just kind of blew her mind. So when she got back home, she just launched into this feeling of having to recapture what her sentiments from that trip. So she made a number of really large abstracts, one of which I'm leaning on right here, and this is a smallish one. And she made these abstracts to represent the cube adobe houses that would then be whitewashed and painted with a see-through white. So sometimes they're just a piece like this, and this, like I said, is a small one. The big one I can't even get off the wall, it's too big. But what it is that she's taken regular corrugated cardboard and treated it, so you can see the bumps in it. Again, she'd be having a fit that I have my hands on these things, but I'm trying to prove a point. And in order to make these cubes look three-dimensional, she's representing the changes in shadow by having the direction of the corrugated look go one way on the top, and got diagonally, and a little difference again down at the bottom, so that you can see the three sides and catch the three-dimensionality of that. And this was her way of capturing all that white feeling that you would see. It's very different for a monochromatic painting to just be white on white on white. It's not even a range of different colors. Yes, there's a hint of shade change with the corrugation, but we have our pinks that we did, but they definitely don't look like white on white. And so that's quite unique for someone to do that way. And what I will say too about these cubed houses and her representation of those geometric shapes. So, they're abstract paintings, but they're geometric, hard-edged forms. And they've been critiqued by other artists, etc. And this is, some of the labeling that they give to this series that she's done, is that Pablo Picasso, who became one of the most famous artists of all time while he was still living. A lot of artists don't become famous until after they pass away. But Pablo Picasso became known while living, and that's partly due to technology, because the word can spread differently. So he grew up in Spain, where they have the same kind of architecture as those cubed houses. And then he lived a lot of his life in France. And initially, when he was a child, which parallels to my mother, not that I'm saying my mother is any kind of Pablo Picasso, but initially his paintings when he was a child were very tight and they were very realistic, and he was trying to replicate the style that you would see in a photograph, because that's what he thought was revered and that would tell the story of him being a great artist. He thought that's the way that you do art. Well, as he went through life, people would make comments about that, and their judgment maybe for a while mattered. And then after a bit, judgment didn't matter at all. It didn't matter what other people thought. Art becomes your own self-expression. It becomes an opportunity to explore and try to do things differently. And each artist that has the opportunity to become well known is usually creating a new way of thinking and a new way of doing art. So what he was thinking about, having grown up immersed in those cube-shaped houses, he was thinking about these forms. He was thinking about the essence of the pieces of items. And then he started to apply that cube kind of thinking of those geometric forms into anything that he painted. So for example, he would have a girlfriend and he would do her portrait. And he thought, if she were in her parts, in her pieces, what could I do with that? So he thought about the face, and he thought, what are the parts of the face? The nose, the eyes, the mouth. Okay, so if I separate all the pieces, and then I reassemble them differently than the ordinary way that we look at them, what does that do to our minds as to how we interpret meaning or how we interpret familiar objects? So he'd take one of those women's noses and he'd stick it over on the cheek, and maybe the mouth would be up here on the forehead, and maybe there'd be two eyes down here, and he just sort of dissected into cube shapes, squares, and then reassembled differently than originally. And he kept doing this over and over again as a means of analyzing the details of things. And I've said to you, making art, if you're looking at an object while you're painting, 90% of it is your analysis and how frequently you look back and forth at the details. So this was his way of analyzing. And he just started to do this and explore this whole concept. He was painting a lot with his friend Brock, and he and Brock together started sharing ideas around this way of creating art. People would call it abstraction, but it wasn't really abstraction, because Abstracts, typically you can't tell what's going on other than form and shape and color and movement, texture, this kind of stuff, but they don't often tell the story unless the artist has told the story, maybe with the title. But his pictures, you could see the essence of things through the parts that had been reassembled differently. So the name of the form of art that Braque and Picasso are known to have created is called Cubism, and it's named after those houses that are cubes from the side of the mountain in Spain, which is just exactly what was going on with my mother's series that were white on whites, and about the whitewashing of cubes and the geometric shapes that she experienced from the deck of the ship as they docked in Venezuela. So now I'm going to move on to another. So that was mixed media because of cardboard and paint and masonite. So now I'm going to move on to another. And this one is one of 4 pieces that assembles together to make one painting. And they hang on their point. So I'm going to hold it up like that. And they're all the same color scheme of sort of a turquoise and a lime green and a navy blue. And as I bring it in close to you, you will see that there's some pen on there, black pen, like pen and ink. And the paint is both underneath and on top of this texturized surface that you're seeing that has little strands of fabric in it. So there's also paint smeared, like over here where there's navy, there's paint on the top. There may be a bit of white on the top. The lime green is underneath and just shows through the fabric. So what is this fabric that's been glued onto this? It's fiberglass. So she used fiberglass that, could be used to glue on to form the outside of a canoe or something that's being constructed like a fiberglass oil tank. But also she would use fiberglass that was part of the filter of the furnace. I'm telling you, she used just about everything to make her paintings. So she had an entire series of this color scheme and this style of using these materials. And this piece that hangs in my house, again, I couldn't ever begin to bring it down to show you on camera because it's so large, because it's 4 of these hung together in a diamond. It's 4 diamonds forming a diamond. And it's her fiberglass series. And this one, let's see if there's a title. Nope, she just has a number, so she probably just called this Untitled. Interestingly, these particular frames are handmade, so she would give herself a little code to line up the frame with the panel of wood so that when it got assembled and all fastened together, solidly glued together, she would have the correct side facing the right direction, etc. So that is another mixed media because of the fiberglass. All right, moving along. Now, I told you that anything was game, and I may have mentioned this one before. So she breaks her sandal one day. Normally you break your sandal, you either get it fixed or you chuck it out, right? Well, not her, because that just became something that would create texture on a painting. So this one, which is called Soul, and soul, of course, could be your spirit soul, which is one spelling, and the other soul could be the sole of your shoe. And this is an oil painting, and it's done on masonite board. The smooth side is what's painted. And as I bring it in close to you, it's, black on orange with some smears of white. But now you're starting to see the sole of the shoe glued on in the middle with paint smeared all over it to help it blend in a bit. And then at the top are the straps. And they may be the straps from 2 different shoes, but I don't know, maybe it had a lot of strappy stuff going on. So she's glued that on. If I turn the painting to the side, you can see the elevation of that sole and of those straps. And she just thought that's a good way to create texture on a painting. So, yeah, think outside the box, right? Another kind of abstract. Mixed media. I don't know how you describe that. Oil paint on wood panel plus shoe or something. I don't know. Okay. Let's see what else I've pulled off the walls. This one. Okay. This one, I think it was kind of fun today because I got reminded that it was meant to be mine because my name is typed on the back, taped on the back with masking tape. So this one's going to be a little weird because you're going to get the glare from the computer screens because it's framed under glass. But this is, let me see, it says oil pastel, and then it's got India ink over the top of it. So that's a certain kind of bottle of black liquid ink that you can buy that's been poured and splattered over top of oil pastels. And then framed under glass, because that's what you got to do with pastels and with watercolor in order to protect the surface, unlike some of those other paintings. And I know why it had my name on it for me to get, because it says this won a first ribbon at the Atlantic Winter Fair. So she was always wanting me to have some of her prize pieces in the permanent collection because she knew my intention to sometime have an art gallery here. So that's that one. Okay, you're going to get a laugh out of this, maybe, but have you ever seen those paper doilies? They were popular years ago. It's kind of like when you buy the paper cups for making cupcakes or muffins. You can also buy these round paper doilies in that section, baking section of the grocery store, or perhaps in the dollar store. And they were a big thing back when. If you were going to put out a plate of muffins or a plate of cookies or brownies and you were serving someone in your home, you might decorate the plate first with a paper doily. And so, again, she'd use anything to make her pictures. So this is paper that has like a lacy look to it. And she's cut out the paper doily into the shapes that she wanted and then stuck it on this panel and painted them the color that she wants. So this was my sister, who's like 19 years older than me, getting married. This is me, 3 years old, at the wedding as the flower girl, and then the bridesmaids. Whoops. So, and then of course some decor for the walls or whatever. So just, again, using whatever you got around the house to make your artwork. All right. Here we have a more current one. And let me see if I can get it the right side up. Not that abstracts have to have an upside down the right side, but actually the wire's on one end and the printing's upside down on the other. This is called Happy Flower Garden. I don't know. Can you see a flower garden in that at all? Anyway, that's her idea of what a happy flower garden looks like. But what I want to talk about is the mixed media part of this. So this is done in acrylics. I can tell because there's nothing slick like oil. And it has gesso on it, so that big bucket of white, thick, goopy stuff that you can buy to build surfaces. And every time I go to one of these splotches that's yellow with orange around it, it's relief. I can actually feel the bumps. There's a lot of bumps on this painting everywhere. She may have smeared some of the paint on with a palette knife. She also has adhered to this painting some corrugated cardboard that's more of a miniature corrugation going across. The bumps aren't as big as the white on whites. So that's on there, torn, not cut with scissors, just to give jagged edges. But what's neat about this one that stands out to me, can you see the iridescence coming off of the painting when I swing it back and forth in the light? That's these little pieces that reflect. Right here is one. That is wrapping paper. So modern day foil-ish wrapping paper, ripped up or cut up into shards and adhered to the surface just to make everything dance a little bit more. Like things are really dancing and bouncing in this. Maybe that's her idea of garden, is that there's all kinds of growth and overgrowth and the sun is out and maybe these are the flowers. I don't know, with the yellow in them, but just it's her idea of happiness and the feeling she gets inside her head and her heart when she's looking at her garden. Yup, you gotta stretch your imagination when you're interpreting artists and their emotions and their titles and this kind of stuff. So, Okay, now, I think I'm getting near the end. I've got this little puppy right here. It's mixed media because it's, again, this masonite board. Masonite you can buy in 4 feet by 8 feet and cut it down, and it becomes a surface that you can paint on, and without having to go to the art store and buy proper stuff. But you have to watch the cost of that nowadays with what's happened with the price of wood with the pandemic. But what she's done is a little paper painting on paper, and she's gone on to the rough part of the masonite, the wood part, and painted this, left this bare, and then glued a piece of paper on, and she's got some texturizing going on in that, and it looks like it's acrylics that she's used somewhat in a watercolor way. And then in order to avoid buying a frame, she's just fastened a strip and put a string on it, and that's what it hangs up with. And not always do you have to spend all the big money to make your art. So that's mixed media because it's both paper and masonite, and painting directly on the masonite and then having the different paints and textures on this. One other material that was used on the last one that I forgot to mention is wax. There's parts of it that have wax dripped over it. Okay, the last one I need to show you is, I think I got everything, yeah. The last one I need to show you is this, and this has a sweet little story to it. So, she started painting when she was 8. She painted until she was 85, right to the end of her life. But in the end, she had macular degeneration, where you lose your eyesight in the middle of your eyes and you can only see out around the periphery. So she was legally blind, but still making art. And we would help her. We'd hand her things. And she'd say, it doesn't look like my art used to look like. And I was like, yeah, but it's not about the end product all the time, is it? It's about the process of engaging in creativity and the feeling you get when you're making art. So what she would do is take some watercolors that she had done that she might not have been particularly satisfied with, and she would use them as the material to make the next painting. And she would do what she was capable of at that stage of her life. So she would tear up the watercolor into these shards and stick it on construction paper. So you've got watercolors, watercolor paper, and construction paper assembled together to make little mosaics. So it's pretty thrilling for me to think that she kept up that feeling that you get of making art right until the end. So a lifetime of doing that. So there you go. That's my little presentation on mixed media. And so I invite you to think about what is in your own home that can become an art material that you never even thought of as an art material before. Artists, they're the ones who invent all this stuff. They usually don't have a big budget. Often when they sell art, it's just to infuse money into buying the next art supplies. And they're just known for, even Pablo Picasso would go to the junkyard and find trash that people had thrown out. Like back then it would be made of metal, but like a kid's toy car, then became a piece that he would put into a sculpture. And he made like an antelope with the antlers, and the antlers were metal, and they were made from the handlebars of a bicycle that were rusted out. So it's just, when you start exploring these well-known artists online and you look at what they used, the imagination, it's just endless what the possibilities are for how they make their art. So I'm going to point you in the direction of mixed media artists who are local. And what I've put up online is that I want you to go explore them. I've named different ones, and I've named what communities they're from. They're from communities near here. Some of them I've put the URL for their websites of where you can see their artwork. A lot of them are members of the Visual Arts Nova Scotia, or VANS group. And some of them have galleries in the area. Some of them offer art lessons right here in the area. And I want you to go have a look at their pieces of work that are mixed media. There might be ones that are not, but look for the ones that are mixed media. So you can use the URLs that I've put for some of them, and for others you can just Google search them and see what you find. And look at a piece or two, take a screenshot, submit that, put a comment about your reaction to their art. And so that's the nature of that assignment. So I'm going to click the off